launch. So like I have to keep that in perspective.
But the sad part about that as well, TNA as Impact Wrestling was also atrocious.
It was terrible.
There was no wrestling. So when AEW showed up, and this is the thing that I do try to say to Martin, is like, dude, you have no idea how bad it was at the time. You know, when AEW showed up as well, they hit this golden period where it was like
they could do no wrong. I mean, it was. They brought, I mean, like it was the perfect timing for that promotion to launch when it did. I mean, I remember covering like the Jacksonville press conference and seeing all the talent showing up, like Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho and Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian and, you know, all, I mean, this is before all these like former WWE guys started showing up, and it just had a fresh new, and it's not like that now. I mean, when I watch an AEW show now, it is 100% the opposite of how it was. But you can't expect a wrestling promotion to be firing off on all cylinders every single year, every single month. Like, it's gonna have struggles, and AEW is just struggling right now. They're struggling, you know, with selling tickets, so they're running smaller venues, which is a good pivot. They should stop running these huge 20,000, 19,000 seat venues, and like the venue they ran where I'm from in Iowa is like a 8,000 to 9,000 seat venue. They only sold about like 2,000 tickets, but they could set it up with the stage and the ring to look like it was sold out, and it looked great. It looked great on television. So that's the one thing I think AEW is trying to focus on and rebuild with. WWE, though, is, to me, hitting that stride that AEW had when it first launched. Like, it's just they now not everything is not completely perfect and flawless, but that's kind of why I wrote some notes. Was like the first thing I noticed was you could tell they didn't have Vince in their ear telling them what to say, to verbatim, like, say, like, you got to say this line, you got to hit it, you know, so many times, you know, per, you know, half hour or per hour. And just knowing all the like weird scripted stuff that they used to make those guys do. And I've heard talent talk about how when they're cutting promos now, they're not having to remember these like paragraphs of words. They can just kind of go like bullet point and go out there. And I mean, you can tell everyone at one point on WWE programming, and I've talked about this to death with Dara, but so he knows what I'm going to say, but they all sounded like a robot repeating lines. So it didn't feel natural.
The most infamous is WWE presents Great Balls of Fire. At WWE presents Great Balls of Fire, I'm going to have a match with you. Yeah.
Everybody sounded like a robot remembering their lines. And I'm noticing with this presentation now, that has been kind of dropped down. I'm sure there's still scripted stuff, and they still have, you know, scripts and stuff that they're following. But it's very different presentation. And that's the one thing that I've always kind of struggled. I'm like, how are AEW fans not noticing this? Are they just intentionally not noticing it? Or they're just so fixated on hating it that they're not giving it a shot to notice, like, this is not the Vince McMahon, Kevin Dunn presentation that you were getting, you know, in 2017, 2018, 2019. It's very different, but maybe
what do you think?
Me.
Well, I mean, Martin, the thing for me is that, say it was 2017 or 2018 and these changes had been made, I probably would have been over the moon. But these changes came along in 2023
ish.
You know, a better alternative had already existed for 4 years at that stage. So they made half the changes I would have wanted 4 years after a company had come in that made 90% of the changes I wanted. So I'd never felt the impetus to go back. Now there's definitely stuff that's better. I mean, like, I'm the same as yourself. Language was a big one for me. Even just being able to say wrestler, say talk like a human, you know, stuff like that was a big thing for me. And that change in 2017 would have been huge, but I've been watching the company do it for 5 years now. So you're kind of making minor changes that I would have appreciated half a decade too late. So
I think it's a case of too little too late for a lot of people. Because I've often said that AEW, a lot of the core fan base were fans of NXT in 2015.
Black and Gold, I loved it.
Yeah. And I think that
one of the reasons that I'm even though I don't watch it, I'm really salty about current NXT.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah, that's very fair.
Because I loved Black and Gold.
But I mean, I think that's
what's so frustrating too, is they tried to make this NXT AEW war. I'm like, why are wrestling fans doing it? And I know because at one point they were going head to head for a while there, but it's just that's what sucks, is that it doesn't have to always be a competition. But I know wrestling fans love that because, and you were talking earlier, Dara, about some people not moving on. There are still some people that really wish we had the Monday Night Wars every week.
Yeah, and we're stuck in there. I mean, I think that's what it is. It's like this weird thing, and it's uniquely wrestling, where it's like the Monday Night Wars were like, what, nearly 30 years ago now?
Oh, God, yeah.
People are just stuck in it, and you're like, you can, and that's what's great about going to a TNA show. And I'm like, first TNA show I went back to was in October, and I went in and it was an entire room with just people who were just the chillest group of people in the world, because they just don't care. They're like, yeah, we like Jim Cornette, but we don't care about AEW or WWE really that much. We're just here for TNA. That was it. You know, it was such a cool vibe compared to when I've been to WrestleMania or when I was at All In, thanks to Martin, because he got me my ticket. So that was still great. But like the thing about that, it was like just night and day between the presentation, and it's one thing I'd recommend. Everybody step outside and go to a death match or something like that, you know, away from WWE and AEW sometimes, to appreciate that we love wrestling.
No matter what your favorite is, go see your indies. Like,
that's so great.
Adam made a real key point for me there, which is something that I would always say, is that I don't like the idea that AEW and WWE are in competition, or that for AEW to be considered successful, it has to do what WWE's doing. For me, it exists as an alternative. I'm fully aware that the style I prefer is not as popular as the sports entertainment style, but I'm very glad that something that caters to the style I do like is there. I don't care if it'll never be number one. I want that alternative to be there. Like, if it's not a choice of one or the other, like if AEW collapses, like I'm not going to go back to watching WWE. That kind of ship has sailed for me. So I don't like the idea that they're in competition. I would prefer if people saw it that there are different options that people can choose from, you know?
Yeah, it should be that way. But unfortunately, people make it a competition because there was no competition. I know that bothered a lot of people in TNA when they finally got on Spike TV, and they were like, well, we feel like we're competing, but then they weren't really. They were still an alternative on Saturday night, and eventually they got prime time, but it still wasn't at the level of WWE. But it doesn't have to supersede WWE or beat WWE to be an alternative. And I
think that's the trap they all fall into. That's why, like, you know, even day one with AEW, I'm like, oh, they're doing TNA in speedrun, you know, and it's not because of what they've done on screen, it's because of the mentality. You know, it's like the amount of people who you talk to, particularly in TNA, you know, a couple of years ago, they'd be like, "Oh, we need to do this." And I'm like, "No, you don't, though." You know,
no,
you're doing what you do, and it's kind of like, "Oh, we have to beat WWE," and you're never going to beat WWE. Do what you're doing, and like even on this podcast, we've identified, you know, when those dips in TNA start happening, is when they forgot who they were.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing as well: Pepsi will never be Coke. But nobody would say that Pepsi's an unsuccessful company. You know,
absolutely,
they don't have to sell as much. They just have to do their own thing.
I think where they started to lose me a little bit was the Drew Jey Uso match. Like, I love how first of all, I have to say, I love how much Jay has kind of like reinvented himself, because I'm just so used to seeing him in the Usos and being a tag team. And it's actually very impressive the way he was able to connect with the audience with his entrance